The void between Neptune and Pluto's orbit was typically silent, broken only by the occasional ping of ice fragments against the UES Thermopylae shields. Captain Jack Morrison stood on the bridge, his weathered face reflected in the reinforced viewports as he watched the endless expanse of space. 20 years of military service hadn't prepared him for the monotony of Kuiper Belt Patrol. "Captain," Lieutenant Rodriguez called from her sensor station, her voice cutting through the quiet hum of bridge operations. "We're picking up something strange. Energy signature unlike anything in our database." Morrison straightened, grateful for anything breaking the routine. "Define strange, Lieutenant." "It's shifting, sir. One moment it reads like a quantum fluctuation, the next like a tear in spacetime. Whatever it is, it's getting closer." The tactical display lit up with warning indicators as a crystalline shape emerged from what appeared to be a fold in space itself. The vessel, if it could be called that, was like nothing human eyes had ever seen. Its hull was comprised of interlocking geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow, catching the distant sunlight and fragmenting it into prismatic arrays. "Shields at maximum," Morrison ordered, but before the words had fully left his mouth, the alien vessel had done the impossible. It passed through their defensive screens as if they weren't there, its crystalline structure vibrating at a frequency that simply ignored their most advanced protection systems. "Sir, they're broadcasting something," Communications Officer Chen reported, his fingers dancing across his console. "It's not radio, not quantum comm. It's like they're projecting directly into our minds." Morrison felt it then, a presence, alien yet desperate, pushing against his consciousness. Images flooded his mind, worlds of crystal beauty being consumed by a living darkness, billions of crystalline beings screaming in harmony as their minds were devoured, and through it all, a singular message of hope centered on Earth, on humans. "Get me a security team to Docking Bay 3, Morrison commanded, fighting through the disorientation. "And someone tell me how they knew exactly where our docking bay was without any transmission from us." The security team arrived just as the crystalline ship completed its impossible docking maneuver, fitting perfectly into their bay despite being of completely alien design. As the ship's hull seemed to liquefy and reshape itself, Morrison led his team forward, pulse rifle at the ready. The beings that emerged were just as impossible as their ship. Humanoid figures of living crystal, their internal structures shifting with patterns that seemed to carry meaning. The tallest of them stepped forward, its surface rippling with what Morrison would later learn was their equivalent of extreme stress. "We are the Arctians," a voice echoed in Morrison's mind, accompanied by images of stellar cartography and desperate battles. "We have crossed 16,000 light years, following fragments of intelligence intercepted from our destroyers. The Void Swarm, they fear you. Only you. Fear us." Morrison lowered his weapon slightly. "We haven't even developed reliable FTL travel yet. How could they?" "Your minds," the Arctian projected, along with a sensation that felt like a mixture of hope and desperation. "The swarm is a psychic collective, consuming consciousness itself. But human neural patterns, they are chaos to the swarm's order. In all their conquests, they avoid your sector of space. You are the only species they have ever feared." Before Morrison could respond, the Arctian's crystalline form flickered, stress fractures appearing across its surface. "We sacrifice everything to reach you. Our ship dies, its core nearly depleted making the journey. The swarm follows. They will find us. Find you. We need." The being's mental voice wavered. "We need humanity's chaos. We need your shield." Morrison looked at the dying ship, the desperate refugees, and felt the weight of command settle onto his shoulders. First contact, and it came with both a compliment and a death sentence. Humanity's first aliens weren't arriving as conquerors or peaceful traders, but as refugees seeking salvation from a threat that could consume the galaxy itself. He keyed his comm. "Get me a direct line to UNC Command. Priority Alpha." And someone find me every scrap of data we have on psychic shielding. It looks like humanity just got drafted into an interstellar war. The United Nations Security Chamber hadn't seen this level of chaos since World War II. Captain Morrison stood at the podium, surrounded by holographic displays showing representatives from every major Earth power, all talking over each other in a cacophony of panic and disbelief. "You've doomed us all by bringing them here," the Russian delegate's voice boomed through the chamber. "These Orcs could be lying. This could be an invasion tactic." Morrison kept his composure, though his jaw tightened. After 3 days of continuous emergency sessions, his patience was wearing thin. "With respect, Delegate Petrov, if they wanted to invade, they wouldn't have arrived in a dying ship with barely a dozen survivors. But they admit something is chasing them." China's representative cut in. "Something that devours entire civilizations. And now it knows where Earth is." The chamber erupted again until General Laura Hayes, commander of Earth's Combined Space Forces, slammed her hand down on her desk. The sharp crack of flesh meeting marble silenced the room. "If I may direct everyone's attention to the Europa feed," Hayes said, her voice steady but tight with controlled tension. The holographic displays shifted to a live feed from Jupiter's ice moon. Morrison felt his blood run cold. Where there had been pristine ice fields yesterday, now there was something else. A writhing mass of darkness that seemed to eat the light itself. "This," Hayes continued, "arrived 2 hours ago. A probe, according to our Arxian guests. A scout for the Void Swarm. In less than 2 hours, it converted a section of Europa into what they call a hive cluster. Our weapons barely scratch it." The chamber went deathly quiet. Morrison seized the moment. The Arxians didn't bring this to our doorstep. The swarm was always coming. But now we have advance warning and allies who understand our enemy. The feed from Europa suddenly flared with light. The UES Exeter, Earth's second most advanced warship, engaged the probe in orbit above the moon. Morrison watched with professional interest as the ship executed a series of unconventional maneuvers, random vector changes, erratic firing patterns, tactics that would get a cadet failed in basic training. To everyone's surprise, it was working. The probe couldn't seem to predict the Exeter's movements. "What you're seeing," Morrison explained, "confirms everything the Arxians told us. The swarm operates on perfect logic, precise calculations, but human unpredictability. What they call our chaos patterns disrupts their ability to predict and counter our actions. The Exeter's captain isn't fighting according to any manual. He's improvising, and the swarm can't adapt." The Europa feed culminated in a brilliant flash as the Exeter landed a killing blow on the probe. Cheers erupted from several delegates, but the Chinese representative raised a hand. "One probe is not a fleet," she said. "Captain Morrison, you're proposing to take Earth's most advanced warship on a mission to defend an alien species we met 3 days ago. What guarantee do we have that this isn't a suicide mission that will leave Earth defenseless?" Morrison took a deep breath. "No guarantees, but our Arxian friends have shared their star charts. The swarm has already converted 3 entire sectors into breeding grounds. They're coming, whether we fight them there or here. At least this way, we choose the battlefield." General Hayes stood. "I believe it's time for a vote. But first, let me be clear about the stakes. If Captain Morrison's mission fails, if the swarm follows the Thermopylae back to Earth, we will initiate Protocol Omega. We'll destroy every piece of space technology we have, eliminate our orbital presence, and do our best to hide our technological civilization. We'll be hiding in the dark, hoping they pass us by." The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. Humanity would have to sacrifice centuries of progress, retreat to a pre-space age existence, all to avoid extinction. Morrison looked each delegate in the eye. The Arxians crossed half the galaxy because they discovered something that terrifies an unstoppable enemy. Us. Now we can either hide and pray, or we can take the fight to them. I know what choice humanity's ancestors would have made. The voting system activated. One by one, green lights began to appear. That is not logical, Captain Morrison. The Arxian engineer, who had taken the name Crystal Thought in Harmony, vibrated with what the crew had learned was their species' equivalent of frustration. Your proposed engine configuration defies optimal mathematical patterns. Morrison pinched the bridge of his nose, a headache building behind his eyes. 2 weeks into their journey to Arxian space, and these conversations were becoming routine. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most logical one, Crystal. Please, the crystalline being's surface rippled. Explain how inefficiency can be superior to perfection. Before Morrison could respond, a klaxon blared through the Thermopyla's corridors. Contact. Lieutenant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom. Void signatures, bearing 340 Mark II. We'll finish this debate later, Morrison said, already sprinting toward the bridge. Crystal Thought in Harmony flowed alongside him, their crystalline form adapting to match his pace. They burst onto the bridge just as the tactical display lit up with multiple hostile contacts. Swarm scouts, Crystal confirmed, their form pulsing with data patterns. Standard hunting formation. They will attempt to belay the tactical analysis. Morrison cut in, watching the enemy movement. Lieutenant Park, take us into that debris field. Captain, Crystal's voice carried both confusion and alarm. The mathematical probability of successful navigation through that density of debris is. Sometimes you have to roll the dice. Morrison grinned, then turned to his weapons officer. Ensign Chung, how's that hybrid weapon system you've been tinkering with? Chung, the youngest officer on the bridge at 23, straightened in his chair. Sir, it's not fully tested. The Arxian crystals respond to human bioelectric fields, but the feedback is intense. It's like 1,000 migraines at once. Better than being digested by the swarm, Morrison replied. Crystal, your people can interface with the ship's systems. Can you modulate the feedback? The Arxian's surface swirled with calculations. Perhaps, yes. We could create a buffer matrix, but it would require precise timing between human impulse and crystalline resonance. The ship shuddered as Park threaded them through the debris field, pieces of ancient destroyed vessels scraping against their shields. The swarm scouts followed, their movements becoming increasingly erratic as they tried to predict the Thermopyla's seemingly random course. Chung, Morrison ordered, link with Crystal. Let's see what this hybrid system can do. Chung placed his hands on the modified weapons console, now studded with Arxian crystals. Crystal Thought in Harmony extended a crystalline tendril to interface with the ship's systems. The moment they connected, Chung gasped, his face contorting in pain. Neural patterns linking, Crystal reported, their form flickering with shared strain. Human chaos meeting crystalline order, creating something new. The weapons display showed energy readings off the scale, where human technology alone would have produced a standard plasma burst, and Arxian technology a precise energy beam. The hybrid system created something else entirely, a cascade of quantum fluctuations that defied physical laws. The lead swarm scout ship simply ceased to exist. By the first Crystal Thought in Harmony whispered, their form rippling with awe. The chaos of human neural impulses, when channeled through our crystalline matrices, it creates weapons that operate outside normal space-time parameters. That's great, Chung managed through gritted teeth, but I can't feel my face. Morrison watched as the remaining swarm scouts broke formation, retreating in what almost looked like panic. Crystal, what exactly did we just discover? The Arxian's surface patterns shifted to what the crew now recognized as their equivalent of excitement. Captain, our species evolved seeking perfect order, perfect patterns. Humans evolved embracing chaos, randomness, possibility. When merged, they create effects that neither of us could achieve alone. The weapon didn't destroy that scout ship. It temporarily rewrote the laws of physics around it. Morrison looked at his young weapons officer, still recovering from the neural feedback. then at their Arxian ally whose earlier frustration had transformed into fascination. "Well," he said, "looks like inefficiency just beat perfection. Now we just need to figure out how to use this without melting our brains." The Thermopylae continued through the debris field, its human crew and Arxian guests looking at each other with new understanding. They had just discovered that their greatest difference wasn't a weakness to overcome, but the key to survival itself. Harmony's crystal hung in space like a massive geometric snowflake, its crystalline surface refracting the light of 3 stars. Or it would have, if the void-sworn ships weren't blocking out most of that light. Captain Morrison counted at least 300 swarm vessels, their biomechanical forms creating a living wall between the colony and its suns. "Analysis?" Morrison asked, looking at the tactical display. Crystal thought in Harmony's surface rippled with rapid calculations. "The colony shields will fail in approximately 43 minutes. Standard combat algorithms suggest retreat is our only option." "Good thing we don't follow standard algorithms." Morrison turned to his crew. "Lieutenant Park, what's the composition of that gas giant's atmosphere?" "Primarily hydrogen and helium, sir," Park replied, "with heavy concentrations of metallic elements in the storm bands." A slow smile spread across Morrison's face. "And those storm bands generate electromagnetic disturbances, don't they?" "Captain," Crystal's form pulsed with concern, "you cannot be suggesting. The atmospheric pressure alone would crush. Our shields were designed for deep space combat." Morrison cut in. "But after your modifications, they can handle a lot more." "Park, take us in." "Rodriguez, I want passive sensors only." "Chung, power weapons down to minimal levels. Let's go for a swim." The Thermopylae dove toward the gas giant's swirling surface. Warning alerts blared as they penetrated the outer atmosphere, the ship's hull groaning under the increasing pressure. Lightning bolts larger than cities arced through the metallic clouds around them. "Hull stress at 60% of maximum," Rodriguez reported, her voice tight. 70%. 80%. "Hold together, old girl," Morrison muttered, watching as they sank deeper into the storm. The Thermopylae shuddered violently as they passed through a particularly dense band of metallic clouds. "The swarm vessels are maintaining their siege formation," Crystal reported, their crystalline form vibrating with the ship's movements. "They appear to be confused by our actions." "They're about to be more than confused." Morrison keyed his comm. "Engineering. Divert power from life support to the hybrid weapons system. We only need 10 minutes of air." Chang's modified weapons console hummed to life, Arxian crystals pulsing in sync with human heartbeats. "Sir, if we fire in this atmosphere, the lightning storms will mask our energy signature," Morrison finished, "and the metallic content will amplify our hybrid weapons quantum cascade effect. Crystal, calculate firing solutions that will use the storm bands as conduits." The Arxian surface swirled with the most complex patterns the crew had ever seen. "Captain, this is beautiful chaos. The storm's electromagnetic fields will create a resonance pattern with our weapons. The effect will be like setting off a bomb inside a bell," Morrison grinned. "Park, position us under the main concentration of their fleet." "Chung, Crystal, on my mark, give it everything you've got. One shot, make it count." The Thermopylae glided through the storms like a shark beneath waves, using the violent currents to mask its movement. Above them, the swarm fleet maintained their siege, unaware of the predator beneath. "In position," Park announced. Morrison took a deep breath of the thinning air. "Fire." Chung and Crystal synchronized, human chaos and crystalline precision merging into something new. The hybrid weapon discharge, its energy merging with a massive lightning bolt. The metallic clouds transformed the single shot into a web of quantum cascades, each bolt carrying the physics-breaking effect higher through the atmosphere. The effect when it reached the swarm fleet was beyond anything they'd predicted. Ships didn't just disappear. They twisted inside out, merged with each other, or simply ceased to occupy normal spacetime. The quantum cascade spread through their tight formation like a virus, each affected ship adding its own energy to the reaction. By the first Crystal whispered, their form nearly transparent with awe. 97% of the fleet, just gone. Park. Morrison's voice was hoarse from the thin air. Get us out of this soup. Rodriguez, send word to the colony. They might want to start believing in miracles. As the Thermopylae climbed out of the gas giant's atmosphere, Morrison watched the surviving swarm ships flee in panic, but his victory was tempered by the knowledge Crystal shared next. Captain, these were scout forces. The main swarm fleet, it's converted 3 entire sectors into breeding grounds. This was just the beginning. Morrison nodded grimly. They'd won the battle with human ingenuity and Arxan precision. But the war? That would take something even greater. Deep within the crystalline archives of Mnemosyne Prime, Captain Morrison stood surrounded by living memory. The archive world's interior was a vast lattice of interconnected crystal matrices, each one containing millennia of stored knowledge. Light danced through the structures, carrying information in patterns too complex for human eyes to follow. These records predate our civilization, Crystal Thought in Harmony explained, their form resonating with the archive's frequencies. They speak of the ancient ones, those who first encountered the swarm. Morrison watched as Lieutenant Rodriguez passed her hand through a beam of light, causing the stored images to ripple and change. Can you show us their first contact? The archive chamber shifted, crystal walls becoming transparent as ancient memories played out around them. They saw massive ships of impossibly advanced design, their hulls bearing spiral patterns that hurt the eyes to look at. The Helios Empire, Crystal narrated, their voice somber. They achieved what they believed to be the pinnacle of evolution, the merger of organic and quantum computing. They created the swarm as their masterwork, a species that could process reality itself as data. The images shifted, showing the swarm's original form, beautiful, almost angelic beings of pure energy and thought. Then came the horror. The Helios Empire's creation turned on them, their perfect quantum consciousness consuming and converting organic minds into extensions of their network. Wait, Rodriguez interrupted, pointing to a particular data stream. Can you focus on that sequence? The memory crystallized, showing a failed swarm attack on a Helios research facility. The facility's defenders had been using experimental weapons, their minds altered by primitive psychic amplifiers. The swarm recoiled from them, their perfect patterns disrupted by the chaos of enhanced organic thought. There, Morrison stepped closer to the image. The swarm's quantum consciousness. It's vulnerable to chaotic neural patterns. That's why they fear humans. Our minds never fully settle into predictable patterns. Crystal's form pulsed with revelation. Yes, the Helios Empire's records show their weapons failed because they couldn't maintain the chaotic patterns. Their enhanced minds always settled into quantum stability. But humans, our minds naturally generate chaos, Rodriguez finished. Every human thought creates patterns that can't be predicted by quantum algorithms. Morrison felt a chill as he understood the implications. That's why the hybrid weapons worked so well. We weren't just adding human control to Arxian technology. Our chaotic thoughts were disrupting the swarm's quantum consciousness. The archive chamber hummed as Crystal accessed deeper records. New images appeared, technical specifications for Helios quantum amplifiers, biological data on neural pattern generation, and terrifying records of failed experiments. Captain, Crystal's voice carried an unfamiliar emotion. Fear. These records show the potential for weaponizing chaotic neural patterns, but the stress on organic minds. The Helios test subjects experience what you would call psychological trauma. Many never recovered. Morrison studied the data, his jaw tightening. Show me the worst-case scenarios. The images that followed would haunt him forever. Test subjects trapped in loops of their worst memories, their minds fractured by the amplification process. Others lost all sense of self, their identities scattered across quantum frequencies. The Arctians could never use this weapon, Crystal explained, their surface rippling with distress. Our crystalline minds are too ordered, too perfect. But humans, your chaotic neural patterns could be amplified through our crystalline matrices, broadcasted directly into the swarm's quantum network, and drive them mad. Morrison finished grimly. Break their hive mind by overwhelming it with human chaos. Rodriguez stepped back from a particularly disturbing image. Sir, if we do this, the human minds powering the broadcast would experience every amplified nightmare, every fear, every moment of darkness in their psyche. Crystal confirmed. All magnified 1,000-fold and projected into the quantum realm. Morrison stood in silence, watching the ancient memories play out around him. They had found their super weapon against the swarm, but the cost would be paid in human sanity. He thought of his crew, of asking them to endure psychological torture that had broken even the mighty Helios Empire. How long, he asked finally, until the main swarm fleet arrives? Crystal's form dimmed. At current reproduction rates in their breeding sectors, 3 weeks. Morrison nodded, his decision weighing like lead in his stomach. Then we have 3 weeks to build our nightmare machine. And God help the poor bastards who have to power it. The ancient archives swirled around them, their light now seeming less like knowledge and more like warning beacons, signaling the terrible price of survival. The medical bay of the Thermopylae had never been so full. Captain Morrison stood in the doorway, watching as another crew member was helped to a bed, their eyes vacant, nose bleeding from the latest test of the psychic broadcast array. "How's Lieutenant Chung?" Morrison asked Dr. Walker, who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Conscious, finally. She gestured to a bed where the young weapons officer lay staring at the ceiling. "The seizures stopped an hour ago, but he's still having vivid hallucinations. Says he keeps seeing his childhood home burning over and over." The massive crystalline structure they'd built around the Thermopylae pulsed with a soft blue light outside the viewports. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. Arxian precision crafted into a weapon that would channel human nightmares. "Captain," Crystal thought in harmony approached, their surface patterns subdued. "We've analyzed the latest test results. The quantum resonance is stronger than anticipated. Each human mind connected to the array experiences not only their own trauma, but echoes of others' pain." Morrison grimaced. "How many minds do we need to generate enough chaos to break their hive mind?" Based on the swarm fleet's estimated size. Crystal's form flickered. Minimum of 5. Simultaneously. For at least 10 minutes. 10 minutes of hell, Morrison muttered, watching another crew member suffer through the aftermath of a 2-minute test. "And we still haven't found anyone who can last more than 3 minutes. A weak voice came from nearby. "Then let me try again." Chang was trying to sit up, despite Dr. Walker's protests. "I lasted longer this time. I can." "Stand down, Lieutenant," Morrison ordered. "You've done enough." "Sir," Chang's voice cracked, "we're out of volunteers. Everyone's either tried and failed, or is too scared after seeing what happened to the others." Morrison knew he was right. The initial enthusiasm for testing had vanished after the first few attempts. Even hardened veterans backed away after seeing their colleagues reduced to trembling wrecks, trapped in loops of their worst memories. A soft crystalline chime interrupted his thoughts. One of the Arxian engineers, light bends through knowledge, entered the medical bay. Their surface showed patterns Morrison had learned to read as deep emotional impact. "Captain," they said, "we've been observing, learning, what your people endure for us. We had no concept of such sacrifice. In our pursuit of perfection, we forgot the power of imperfection, of pain freely chosen for others' sake." The Arxian moved to Chang's bedside, extending a crystalline tendril that shed soothing light. "Your courage teaches us what we lost in our quest for flawless order. Perhaps that is why the universe needed both our species." A warning klaxon cut through the moment. Rodriguez's voice came over the intercom. "Captain to the bridge. long-range sensors detecting quantum disturbances, multiple signatures, bearing 047. Morrison was already moving. In the bridge, the tactical display showed a terrifying sight. Space itself seeming to warp as the first waves of the main swarm fleet began to arrive. "How long?" he demanded. At current emergence rates, Rodriguez swallowed hard. 2 hours until their vanguard arrives. Maybe 6 until the main fleet is here. Morrison looked around his bridge, at the faces of his crew, tired, scared, but determined. Then he made his decision. "Clear the med bay," he ordered, "and prepare a broadcast station for me." Crystal's form pulsed with alarm. "Captain, no. The neural feedback is my responsibility." Morrison cut them off. "I won't order anyone to endure that hell, but we need 5 minds." "Fine. I'll be the first volunteer." "Sir," Chang called from the doorway where Dr. Walker was helping him stand. "You can't do it alone." "He won't." Rodriguez stood from her station. "I volunteer as second." "Third," called Park from the helm. Dr. Walker stepped forward. "Fourth. I've seen what it does. Maybe that'll help me fight it." Chang straightened, despite his shaking legs. "Fifth. We started this together, sir." Morrison looked at his volunteers, his throat tight. These people were about to walk into psychological torture for the sake of 2 species survival. The Arxians watched in stunned silence, their crystalline forms resonating with what might have been awe. "Begin final preparations," Morrison ordered. "And someone find me every painkiller we've got. We're about to have the worst headache in human history." As his crew moved to their positions, Morrison touched the crystalline wall of the bridge. Soon, this beautiful structure would channel their nightmares into space itself, and the true test of humanity's resistance to cosmic horror would begin. The void swarm came like a dark tide, their biomechanical ships blotting out the stars. At the heart of the Arxian defense fleet, the Thermopylae floated within its crystalline cathedral, looking absurdly small against the approaching apocalypse. Inside the broadcast chamber, Captain Morrison sat in one of 5 crystalline pods, neural interfaces threading through his hair. Around him, his volunteers prepared for their descent into nightmare. Rodriguez, Park, Walker, and Chang, each looking as terrified as he felt. "The swarm fleet's quantum signature is massive," Crystal Thought in Harmony reported, their form pulsing with anxiety. "Far larger than even our worst projections. They've brought planet cracker weapons." "Then we better not fail," Morrison managed through clenched teeth. Status of the broadcast array. Crystal matrices aligned. Neural interfaces active. Human minds linking in 3, 2, 1. The world exploded into pain. Morrison's consciousness fractured, every fear he'd ever known rushing to the surface. He was 6 again, watching his father's ship explode during the Mars colony disaster. He was 20, holding his dying best friend during the Antarctic War. He was everywhere and nowhere. Every nightmare he'd ever had playing simultaneously. "Stay focused," he heard himself scream, though his mouth hadn't moved. "Push it out." Through the quantum link, he felt his crew's torment joining his own. Rodriguez relived the death of her sister in an endless loop. Park's memories of North Korean prison camps twisted into impossible geometries. Walker's medical nightmares of failed surgeries merged with Chang's childhood trauma of the Singapore floods. Their combined anguish, amplified through the crystalline matrix, burst outward like a psychic tsunami. The first wave of swarm ships hit the blast of human chaos. Their perfect quantum consciousness, engineered for order and precision, couldn't process the madness. Ships began to spiral out of formation, their hive-mind connection disrupting. "It's working." Crystal's voice seemed to come from 1,000,000 miles away. "The swarm's neural network is destabilizing. But, by the first crystal, your pain levels." Morrison couldn't respond. He was drowning in memory, in fear, in the collected suffering of 5 human minds pushed beyond their limits. Blood ran from his nose, his ears, his eyes. Through the neural link, He felt Chung having seizures, heard Walker screaming in frequencies that shouldn't exist. The swarm pressed forward, their vast intelligence trying to adapt. The pressure in Morrison's mind increased as they fought back, pushing their own alien thoughts into the human minds attacking them. 3 minutes, Crystal reported. Swarm fleet at 60% coherence. Human neural patterns reaching critical. Rodriguez flatlined for 2 seconds before emergency protocols shocked her back. Park was speaking in tongues, ancient languages bubbling up from his fractured psyche. The crystalline cathedral around them resonated with their torment, turning their suffering into a weapon that rippled through space-time itself. 5 minutes. Swarm coherence at 40%. Captain, you have to stop. The human mind was never meant to. No. Morrison forced the word out through bloody teeth. Push everything through. He opened himself completely, surrendering to the pain, letting every nightmare he'd ever had flow freely into the broadcast. His crew followed suit, their minds becoming pure chaos, 5 points of human darkness expanding into an ocean of ordered light. 7 minutes. Swarm ships. They're turning on each other. The hive mind is breaking apart. Morrison felt it happening. Where the swarm's consciousness touched their chaotic broadcast, it shattered. Billions of trapped minds, absorbed over eons into the hive mind, suddenly broke free. The quantum network that had held them together for millennia began to unravel. 9 minutes. Captain, they're retreating. The fleet it's dissolving. But your life signs. The world went white, then black, then something else entirely. Morrison's last coherent thought, before consciousness fled completely, was a memory. His father's voice, reading him ancient poetry about the darkness before dawn, about the price of light. As his mind finally broke under the strain, as reality itself seemed to bend around the crystalline cathedral, the swarm fleet collapsed into chaos. Humanity's nightmares had become their salvation. The medical bay of the Arxian flagship Crystal Ascendant hummed with healing energies as Captain Morrison opened his eyes for the first time in 3 weeks. The ceiling above him was a lattice of living crystal, pulsing with soft, therapeutic light. He's awake. Dr. Walker's voice, though weak, carried obvious relief. Someone get Crystal in here. Morrison tried to turn his head and found even that simple movement exhausting. His mind felt raw, like an open wound slowly scabbing over. Images flickered at the edges of his consciousness. Nightmares, memories, and things that were neither. Crystal thought in harmony flowed into the room, their crystalline form now bearing complex new patterns that Morrison had never seen before. Captain, we weren't certain you would return to us. The others, Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. All alive, Crystal assured him. Lieutenant Rodriguez regained consciousness yesterday, Park and Chung the day before. Dr. Walker, as you can hear, was the first to recover, though recovery might not be the right word. Morrison finally managed to turn his head. The medical bay held dozens of beds, but what caught his attention were the beings moving between them. Former swarm drones, their biomechanical forms now housing individual consciousness instead of hive mind control. How many? He asked. Millions, Crystal's form rippled with awe. When your broadcast shattered their quantum network, each drone, each ship, became an individual again. They remember everything, their original species, their assimilation, their imprisonment in the hive mind. Some were ancient when the Helios Empire first fell. A former swarm being approached Morrison's bed. Its form was oddly beautiful now that it wasn't part of the horror that had hunted them across space. We bring gratitude, it said in a voice like singing crystal, and apology. We were prisoners in our own minds for eons, watching our bodies consume world after world. Morrison tried to sit up, but his muscles wouldn't cooperate. The queens, the ones controlling the hive mind. Gone, Crystal answered. Your chaos broadcast didn't just free the drones. It completely destroyed the quantum consciousness binding them together. The queens couldn't survive the severance. They were too deeply embedded in the network. Your pain freed us, the former drone added. We felt it when your minds touched ours, felt your willingness to endure torment for the sake of others. It awakened something in us, reminded us what it meant to be individuals, to choose, to sacrifice. Dr. Walker approached, looking tired but steady. The experience changed us too, Captain. The neural links, they left something behind. All 5 of us. We can sense each other's thoughts sometimes, feel each other's emotions. The Arxians think our minds were quantum entangled by the broadcast. A gift, Crystal said, though perhaps a mixed one. Your neurology has been fundamentally altered. You're now living bridges between normal space and quantum reality. The first true human quantum hybrids. Morrison closed his eyes, feeling the truth of it. He could sense his crew's presence at the edges of his consciousness, 5 points of light connected by threads of shared suffering and triumph. There's more, Crystal continued. The freed swarm beings. They want to stay, to help. Their biomechanical technology, combined with our crystalline science and your quantum-touched minds, we could build something entirely new. A civilization that embraces both chaos and order, organic and synthetic, individual and collective. The former drone's form shifted, creating patterns that mimicked Arxian expression. We were made to be perfect. You taught us the power of imperfection. Let us learn from you, as you learn from us. Morrison felt tears on his cheeks, his own, and somehow Rodriguez's too, their emotions mingling across their quantum connection. They had come so far from that first desperate contact in the Kuiper Belt. Humanity had been asked to be a shield, but they had become something far more. A bridge between different forms of life, different ways of thinking, different possibilities of existence. Well, he managed a weak smile. I guess Earth's going to need a bigger diplomatic course. As healing crystals pulsed and former enemies became allies, Morrison felt the quantum echo of his crew's laughter merging with his own. They had faced the darkness of space and the darkness in their own minds, and emerged transformed. Not just humanity's finest hour, but perhaps the galaxy's finest evolution.